So let's move on the next topic. So next is contract testing using Pact. We have Anil and Lovish who is help us to understand how you can strategize your Pact using contract testing. And Anil, so Anil is a quality analyst with 10 years of experience, and he is based out of Gurgaon location. And Lovish is an app developer who has 6+ years of experience. And yeah, stage is yours, Anil and Lovish. Over to you.
Thanks. All right. So my introduction has already been given, but just for the sake of simplicity, let me introduce myself again. Hi, my name is Anil Soni, and I am basically a quality analyst. Okay, and I am located in and working in Thoughtworks Gurgaon. I have around 10+ years of experience in IT industry. Currently associated with Thoughtworks for more than or close to 3 years now. Yeah, with this, I'll hand over to Lovish to introduce himself.
Thank you, Anil. Hi, everybody. This is Lovish, and I'm from Thoughtworks Gurgaon, and I'm working with Thoughtworks for around 3 years. And I'm an app dev. So luckily, I got an opportunity to attend vodQA. So let's begin the session, Anil. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lovish. All right, so let me just screen share. I hope you can see my screen. It's still loading. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So today we will present you a talk on contract testing. Let me just start with the agenda. So in the agenda, we will be covering about microservices. Then we will cover about the integration testing and the pros and cons of using the integration testing. Going forward, we will introduce you with the concept and the implementation of contract testing and how do we use a Pact and Pact broker tool for contract testing. Then we will look into the contract file and how the implementation is done for the contract file. Going forward, we will also try to demonstrate the same use case basis on that same thing. And next is we will look into the Pact best practices. And finally, we will conclude our presentation with the integration with the pipelines. How do we do that? Integration of the Pact, basically. All right, so let's move ahead and see what are microservices and how do we basically integrate the microservices. So let me go ahead with the first part of it. So yeah, as you can see here, we have in front of the screen, we have two different architecture. One is a simplified version of a monolithic architecture, and on the right side, we have microservice architecture. So in monolithic, basically, it is basically a single tier application where the entire backend and the front end code base is kept into a single tier application. Okay, the deployment happens all at once, regardless of where the change is. All right. Good thing is everything is placed into the same place, but there are some few drawbacks that with the introduction of new features, the code base becomes more clumsy and more complex. The deployment takes much time. It leads to issues with the scalability and the maintenance. All right. So developers start implementing the same monolithic architecture into the microservice architecture, where basically it is split into multiple small chunks of autonomous and isolated modules, where the each module is behaving as an autonomous module. All right, and these modules are basically called microservices. These microservices communicate with each other through the use of APIs. As you can see on the right hand side, that this is basically an overview of the microservices where they are interacting with each other via some APIs. All right, let's move ahead. So we'll see how the integration happens. So this is a simplified version of 3 microservices from a big architecture. As you can see over here, that we have retailer service, the product service, and the consumer service. So product service is basically communicating with the retailer service through the get API, which is an item/item ID, and is expecting a response of 200 with some message. All right. Since product service is expecting a response from retailer service, so retailer service is termed as a provider, whereas the product service, since it is consuming the API, it is termed as a consumer. The same goes for the customer service. So in our demo purpose, we will use the same diagram and same APIs to basically communicate, show the demo for the Pact. All right. So let's move ahead and see how do we perform, integration test on these services. All right. As you can see here, this is the same diagram, and here basically we are using integration test suite, and these integration test suite basically are kept in the consumer level. As you can see that the product service is acting as a consumer, and the integration test suite is placed in the consumer side of the code. Okay, the integration test will basically communicate to the retailer through the real-time API get item / item ID. Okay, and basically we will be asserting the response and the JSON, that is ID comma name. Okay, and once that is verified, we will make sure that the integration test is passed, and everything, the communication basically between the retailer and the product service happens smoothly, right? The same goes for the customer service. But this is the ideal situation. In real situation, what goes wrong is can be multiple things. The first thing is the retailer service is down, for example. All right, then your integration test, which is basically calling the item / item ID, will start failing. Okay, it can happen the retailer service again is a little slow, and the integration test will behave work like in a delay mode, right? So there are certain issues that are happening here, right? And you can see that there is a direct communication that is happening between two microservices, which leads to these issues, right, in our integration test. And what if the retailer service has changed its contract or the response? Now the integration test again will start failing on the consumer side. There was no mistake of the product service, but still the integration test start failing. Now you have to basically debug and try to find out the root cause. Ultimately, you can see that the control is not in the hand of the consumer, and every control to modify this API response is basically with the provider, right? So these are the certain issues that we see in the integration test. So let's go ahead and see the pros and cons of the integration test. As I discussed, it helps first let's discuss the pros basically. So it helps to test the end-to-end integration between the services, which is like a real time in the production environment, right? So this basically gives us the confidence to release. But there are cons. It basically increases the dependencies between multiple services, right? And what if the services are like in case of e-commerce websites or any website where you have so many hundreds of microservices, right? So it increases the dependency. It gives the slower feedback. The time to consume to fix this will be more, and it also breaks due to the external factors as we have just discussed, like what if the service is slow, what if they have changed, the provider have changed the response, what if the provider is returning me slow response, then your integration test and the time to basically release to the production pipeline will be delayed, right? So these are the things that are there in the integration test, which leads us to the introduction of basically contract testing. So I'll hand over to Lovish here to basically introduce us to the contract testing. Over to Lovish.
Thank you, Anil. All right. So now after understanding the microservices and the challenging in the integration and their testing, now let's talk about the contract testing. So as we have seen in the integration test that there is a consumer and there is a provider, and same is on the current diagram that product service is a consumer and retailer service is a provider. So basically, instead of directly hitting the retailer service, product service will mock the provider and run a consumer test against that mocked provider. That consumer test will be a unit test, and it will satisfy the test against that mocked provider. And after satisfying that particular unit test, it will generate a contract. That contract will basically contain the whole contact information, as you can see in the contact diagram, that the API should be of get type, path should be item/item ID, and the response should be ID and name in the JSON. So this kind of contract will be created by the consumer, and now then it will be the responsibility of the provider, that is the retailer service, to take care of that contract and satisfy the requirement of their consumer. So you can relate this whole scenario to a real life example. For example, if you are a company or a buyer and you acquire something, then you make some agreements, some contracts, like we will give you this and you will provide this. So there are some legal documents, we call them contract, pact, right? And this is just that kind of contract where consumer and provider align together that this is my API, I will give you this, and I will always satisfy your contract. This is that kind of thing. Yeah, that is all about the context testing. And now let's see the advantages of context testing. So as we have seen, like it provides all the benefits which is provided, almost all the benefits which is provided by integration testing. And if it gives the confidence to release, that is the most important benefit we need from a testing. Like we need the confidence to move forward to live on prod, right? And it runs independently without need of other services in real time. I already explained in integration testing, it hits a real-time API, but in context testing, it doesn't. And it also runs with stability and reliability and easy to maintain, because you don't need the service live every time, right? You can anytime change the things and rely with the teams can rely with each other, right? And it gives the feedback faster than the integration testing, because it is independent upon the service, and definitely it will increase the speed as well. That was about the advantages of the context testing in comparison to the integration testing. Next slide, please. So after learning about the contract testing concept, we need some tools to implement that, right? And there are some other ways as well, but here we are talking about the Pact. Pact is a tool, and next slide, please. Yeah. So here we have the Pact framework. So Pact framework provides us some classified libraries and classes which we can use to implement the contract testing, the consumer test, provider test, publishing of contracts. So these kind of libraries and classes are provided by the Pact framework. It also provides us a Pact broker. So here you can see it's a code first consumer driven contract testing tool, because consumer decides the contract and publish that, and then provider takes care of that. That's why we call it code first consumer driven. And the contract is generated during the execution of automated consumer tests. For example, you have set it up the consumer test, then you just need to run them in the pipeline. It will automatically test the scenario and create a contract and publish to the provider, right? And the best part is only part of the communication that are actually used by consumer get tested. So you don't need to worry about the unintentional changes or any provider behavior not used by current consumer is free to change. Okay, so that's all the flexibility provided by Pact for the contract testing. We have also mentioned the Pact documentation in this slide. Later when we will share, you can refer to the original documentation. Next slide. Right. So after learning about contract testing in the Pact framework, now the best part is Pact broker. So if you again go back to the real life example, when you are acquiring some company or something, then you need a contract, right? But there are a lot of contracts you are already having. Then who will manage that? You need an agent. You need a third party company who will manage your contracts and keep it safe. And whenever you need, you can get them and check, right? So here the Pact broker is that agent. So you can call it agent, and its official name is Pact broker. It actually acts like a broker. It takes care of the contracts and the provider gets from it. Let's see the diagram flow wise. So you see product service is a consumer, and it runs a consumer test with a mock provider, and after satisfying that consumer test, which is actually a unit test, it generates a contract. Okay, and contract mentioned that get API 200 status should be there, and the ID and name should be in the response, right? And then it published that contract to Pact broker, and after that, consumer's responsibility is over. Consumer is now free for the other work, and they can now enjoy their life, right? Now Pact broker is having the contract, and same will be done by other consumers. And this Pact broker can have infinite number of interactions. Like if there are multiple providers and consumers, then Pact broker is having their own database, which is by default PostgreSQL, and and it holds all the context with its storage, right? And then the providers can contact a Pact broker and ask, hey Pact broker, I am the provider, and let me know who are the consumers of my application. And then Pact broker will will send all the contracts to that provider. Okay, so product service and customer service are your consumer, and here are their contracts, and now you have to satisfy that. So this is the role of Pact broker in the overall architecture. Yeah, that's all about the Pact broker. And the next slide, please. Yeah. Now, as I said, once the consumer runs a unit test and generate a contract and it publishes to the Pact broker, then it's very important to understand what is that contract, right? That contract is nothing, is just a JSON file which tells you about the whole interaction document. If you see on the left side, that is a high level structure of that JSON, that there is a provider name, consumer name, interaction, the important part, that what is the interaction of this contract, and the metadata, the some version specific things. Now, if you see the right hand side, is we are maximizing the interaction part. There it is telling that this is the first interaction is an array, because in that relation, the provider and consumer relation, there can be multiple interactions, right? Product service can consume multiple APIs of a retailer provider, right? So that's why that's an array, and we are right now we have only one interaction. So it is telling that the description is get item details for item ID, request should be like this, response should be like this, and the provider state is get item details. So what's the state here? So state is a very important thing, because when the provider will fetch the contract, then it needs something unique so that it can match the interaction and satisfy that. And the state is that unique thing. So the state of every interaction should be unique, because by this state, provider will map their test with this contract and run them. So this is the overall contract file components we have seen: provider, consumer, and the interaction, and then the metadata. Yeah, that's all about the contract file. And after learning that how it happens at the consumer side, let's have a quick go through on provider service verification. So as I said, like there is a state in the contract for every interaction. So what provider does, when a provider write a provider test, it mentions a state, like for this state, this is my response, right? And then after setting that state from consumer, it mock the test data. So it actually mock their service and mock like this would be the response when the contract will hit my API. And after sending the real-time HTTP request, it checks the response, like the response sent by provider is matching with the contract response or not. If matching, then it asserts and verify the pact. Now, just one thing I missed here is about what it verifies. So Pact contract testing never verifies the values. It verifies the structure of the response. Like if you have mentioned that in the response you need the ID and name, and ID should be an int type and name should be of string type, then Pact will always take care of that. So if, for example, if the provider changes the int to ID to a string type in future, then your Pact will break, because consumer has mentioned that ID should be of int type. So it never checks for the value. It always checks for the structure of the response, of the data type of the response, right? So that's all about the consumer and service provider side involvement in the context testing using the Pact broker. And after learning this, I think now we can go through the demo and all the other parts. And now I will hand over to Anil.
Thanks, Lovish. So now what we'll do is we'll have a quick demo walkthrough. I'm going to just give me a moment. Okay. I did a, yeah. So let me just go through the code here. So we will be using the same problem statement, that there are three services. One is one is a provider, that is a retailer, and two are the consumers. Let's see first the walkthrough for the retailer service, which is a provider. And in here, for the purpose of easy this thing, so I have placed a Docker compose file for the Pact broker. Basically, we need a Pact broker, right, in between, as Lovish has mentioned. So we are basically using a Pact broker image to spin up a Pact broker. All right, and it is basically exposed on 9292 port, localhost 9292 port. Okay, since the contract file, since a Pact broker is responsible to keep the contract files, and hence it needs a database, so we are using a Postgres for that. Okay, so I have already spun up the container for the for this Pact broker, and I'll just show you that it is exposed on localhost 9292. So for the simplicity, I have already created a contract file here. So just forget about this one. Just see that we have a UI of the Pact broker where it is divided to multiple components. That is the consumer, the provider, the latest Pact published time, the webhook status, and when it was last verified. All right. Let's go to the retailer service first, and we'll see what exactly is there in this code. Okay, so this is basically, this application or service is basically a Spring Boot Java application. Okay, and to make use of, since it's a provider, to make use of Pact, we are using these two dependencies: Pact JVM provider, Spring, and JUnit. I hope my screen is visible and the font is, you are able to see the font. Please let me know, Lovish.
Yeah, for me, it's good.
Okay, fine. I have just intentionally increased the font size here. All right. So we are using these two dependencies for the Pact JVM provider, which is Spring and JUnit. Okay, and let's go to the source code of this service. Let's go to the retailer controller, where you can see that we are using two get APIs. One is get item / item ID, and other is the get order / order ID. Okay, let's go to this API, which is basically using get item details. If I go inside this, so this is a retailer service method where you can see that I am just returning a small object of type item, and this is hard coded. All right, the idea is basically, just understand that the idea is the data is coming from third-party service or from a database, but for the simplicity I am just hard coding these values. All right, going to the retailer controller, you can see that these are the two APIs which we have seen in that diagram, right? Two consumers were there and one retailer which are interacting with this provider. Okay, these are the two APIs. Now let's see, and let's see the product which is acting as a consumer in our case. Okay, I'll go to the build Gradle first, and we'll see what is the dependency that we are using. So this is the dependency that we are using for Pact. Okay, to basically load all the annotations and the libraries. Okay, going into the main class. Here you can see that this is the product service. Okay, this is internally hitting this API, which is the API from the provider / item / some random ID. Okay, we are getting some output of it, right? And it is basically consumed by this consumer. Now the idea is this consumer needs to. This is the responsibility of this consumer to basically verify the contract test so that the provider will adhere to. Okay, any expectations from the provider has to be written in the contract test by this consumer in its consumer code. Okay, let's see the code. You can see, okay, before that, I'll just want to convey one more thing. Once the Pact is generated, right? So a consumer has generated a contract test using a mock provider, and now we want to publish this Pact contract file, right, onto the Pact broker. So this is the Gradle task that we are using. Here we need to specify two mandatory parameters, which are a Pact directory, okay, and the Pact broker URL, which is basically the host URL for the Pact broker, okay, which we have just shown. Now, once that contract file is generated, it will be published through this task. So let's see the code for the generating the contract file. Okay, so here what we are doing is we are creating a mock provider, okay, and we are mocking this retailer, which is a provider in our case, right? And this method is basically, this is the method which is basically responsible to generate the contract file with the annotation @Pact, and it shows the relationship between the Pact, between the consumer and the provider, which are product and retailer. Okay, this is the response file which we need, response basically which we need. Okay, as you can see here, we are using all the fields which are mandatory fields which the consumer needs. Okay, and the data type of these fields, as Lovish has mentioned, that we are more interested into getting the data type and the structure of the response instead of just the values, right? And values are no matter in the Pact test. This part is basically is important, which is responsible to generate the contract file. As you can, just remember that what we have seen in here. Just give me a moment. Yeah, as we have seen in here, what are the interactions, consumer, provider, and everything. So this is basically kept in this code. The state, okay, which is a uniquely identified state for each consumer and the provider for specific contract. This is the path, that is the API. This is the method get post. What status that we expect, what is the header, what is the response body that the consumer is expecting from the provider. Now going ahead, this is the unit test that we will be running. Okay, this is basically using the same method, get item details. As if I go inside it, you can see that it is internally hitting the same API, right? Get API. It is mocked because the retailer is mocked here. Okay, and it is basically we are doing an assertion here. Once this assertion is passed, it will basically generate a contract file with respect to these entire details. All right, so what we'll do is we will quickly run this and we'll see how the contract file is generated. Going here, I'm here, so I have this Gradle task, GRADLEW test. It says build successful. Let's go back to the code. This is the product, and I will reload this, and it has not generated. Let me run it from here. All right, let's see. All right, there was some problem probably, but as you can see that a target folder is generated. Okay, and inside the target folder we have pacts, and a pact is generated. So this is the same pact data, okay, generated contract file in form of JSON that Lovish was talking about, which contains the important details of provider, consumer, and the interactions and the metadata. This interaction is the same interaction which we have kept in our code. All right, the matching rules and the body response and the header. All right, so this task is done, that the file is generated. Now we need to basically push this file or publish this file onto the Pact broker. So for that purpose, we need this task, Pact publish. Okay, let me now try again from here, the Pact publish task. Okay, sorry. All right, before that, let me just show you here. There is no consumer as product and retailer here. Okay, so I'll try to publish this and see what happens. I hope it gets generated there. So you can see that the message is says that it is created and it is published. So let's see here. I'll reload this, and you can see here that the second row, product and retailer, less than a minute, the latest pack has been published, but it was verified long back to the morning. I ran it. That's why otherwise it would show that it is not yet verified. All right. So this is the first task that has been created from the consumer side. Now it's the responsibility of the retailer, I mean, the provider, to verify these contract tests. Okay, let's go to the code of retailer. Okay, so in here, I will directly go to this file. Here, let me just tell you that for each consumer there will be we are just generally maintain a separate file, Java file, okay, which contains all the tests that we need to perform. All right, so let's see the product pack tests. Here we are so we need to specify the annotations for the which product, which consumer and which provider. We need to specify the pack broker URL because provider needs the contract file from the pack broker, right? So it needs the URL of it. Now in here, as Lovish was mentioning, that there is a state, right? It should be a uniquely identified state for each contract file between the consumer and provider. What happens here is, in this test, when this test will run, right, the controller or the pack will try to find all the contracts between the provider and the consumer from the pack broker. Among those contracts, it will try to find out the contract file with respect to this specific state, and with this state it will perform the assertion of that contract file. All right, here we have written a simple test. We have mocked this data. Okay, we have mocked the retailer service. This retailer service is the same retailer service where we are calling these methods. So now once this retailer service is mocked, we are simply mocking it and calling the method and returning this same method. All right, as soon as this method is called, right, the state the contract file with respect to this state will be pulled, and it will be verified with respect to the assertion that has been happened. Okay, what I'll do is I'll quickly run the contract test. Okay, yeah, so I have to use this test task to basically run the contract tests. All right, it says again build verified. Let me go here and let me just run it. There is some problem with the Gradle test. What I'll do is I will run it from here, retailer. Okay. Now, as you can see here, it says that it returns a response with the status code and something, everything is passed. So if I go in here, okay, I am not very generally it should. Let me give me 1 minute.
I think it's taking the past data.
Yeah, it is taking past data. The thing is, we need to run it from the Gradle test. Why? Because we are using in the Gradle file, we are using a field which says to publish the tests on the URL. So basis on that. All right. What I'll do is, this could be a happy case, but it's not working. I'm not sure why. What I'll do is let me just try and show you the negative scenario basis on this, that consider that the retailer service, that is the provider, has changed some code basis on that. Okay, and what by mistake the provider has changed the variable from price to the total. Okay, and now it is pushed to the pipeline. The test will run. Okay, and now our understanding is the test should fail. Okay, let's see what happens. I hope this time it will fail. Let's see that. All right, as you can see that the test is failed, and the data is exposed to this location. I will quickly show you the location, and it is not showing here. Let me reload this. As you can see here, this is completed in last 1 minute, and it is saying that it is failed, right? This is how basically we are able to prove that the contract test is being pushed into the Pact broker and the assertion is failed. If you want to see the result, you may take the help of this file. Okay, and you will be able to see it. So let me just go to the retailer service, and it will where is it? Build retailer, build reports test in XHTML. Let me just open it in here. All right. Here you can see that it says that there is a mismatch and it is expecting price, but it was missing. So the contract file says that we need the price, but it is missing, right? So in this way, you make sure that the contract the provider has to adhere with the contract that is supplied by the consumer. Let's go here. Let's go here and see the contract file. So this is the pact between the product and retailer. Okay, the same things are we are using here. That is the method, the path, and the retailer, that is the provider, should respond with this data. Okay, and now let me go back and this as you can see, customer and retailer, it is passed in last 2 minutes, because the retailer has run the provider test with respect to this Gradle task. Okay, as you can see that there were basically 3 tests. Okay, one is failed. This failed test is the provider product, that is first consumer test, which is failed. Okay, now what I'll show you here is I will show the network graph. What is network graph? Network graph is basically the way of showing who is the consumer, who is the provider. As you can see, there are 2 consumers. Okay, the arrow originating from the consumer and it is going inside the retailer. Okay, in this way you can see that if there are hundreds of consumer and hundreds of retail providers, the network graph will be very helpful for you to see the peak picture basically. All right, now what I'll quickly do is I'm here, retailer service. I will rerun this test by changing the details here, and it will basically run the test again. I'm saving this data. Okay, and I will run this test again, and let's see if it is passing or not. This is my last try for this product service. Let's see. All right, it says 3 tests are run, and going back to this, and if I run it, you can see that both of them are verified in the last 1 minute, right? So this is how basically you can run your test on the local. Let's go back to the presentation. So I'm here now. I'll start the slide mode. Now with this, I am done with the walkthrough. If I go to the next part, this is basically we need to integrate this Pact with our pipelines. So let's go to the pipelines quickly. As you can see on my left hand side, it's the consumer pipeline where the changes has happened from the consumer side. Okay, the service from the consumer side, it has run the execute the tests, unit tests, it generates the contract files, it publishes the contract file into the Pact broker, and finally the code is deployed to the next environment. All right, there is no issue in that. Now on the right hand side, you can see that there is a provider pipeline, okay, which is basically responsible to verify those tests. Now the code has been pushed by the provider, it executes those tests. Okay, during the execution, Pact will verify the Pact test. If it is verified, the same code will be pushed to the next environment. Okay, and there won't be an issue. But if it is not verified and the Pact fails, then the pipeline will be blocked. In this way, you make sure that provider will not mistakenly or unintentionally does not push the code which is hampering the consumer code. Okay, so this is how basically we make sure that if the services are microservices are working in silos, they or we are using the mocks, basically they should adhere to the said contracts and the expectations between the consumer and the provider. All right, with this I have come to an end from my side. I will hand over to Lovish to take care of the rest of the presentation. Over to Lovish.
Thank you so much, Anil, for beautifully presented the demo. And now, after learning about the contract testing in the Pact tool, it's very important to know when to use the Pact framework, because it's not useful for every use case, right? So next slide, please. So I just read it out. In the right situation, Pact should make testing your integrations less painful than traditional integration tests, as I said earlier. But in the wrong situation, it will probably just as painful or maybe more worse experience than before. So we need to be very conscious about our use cases before choosing any framework or any testing, contract testing kind of thing. Yeah. Now let's see some pros and cons. So let's first of all, let's see the advantages that you and your team control the development of both the consumer and provider. So basically, if you are in a project and you have multiple teams, then the provider and consumer should be in the same infrastructure. Otherwise, it would not be possible to have the Pact broker common for both things, right? So because in my project, there was an example, we are collaborating with a third-party stakeholder of client, and their service wants to test our API via Pact, but that was not possible because their services were running in a different infrastructure, different cloud, and ours are indifferent. So that is not a good use case there. The consumer and provider are both under active development. So you are a consumer, but the API you are consuming, the provider service is just on a pause state. No, not of any of the team is working on actively on that service. Then it's very hard if you put some requirement and they will fulfill that, right? So both the services should be in the active development, and there is a small enough. There should be a small enough group of consumer for a given provider. The example is like if you think about the large enterprise system, there's a Pact would be a very bad tool because it would not be able to handle a lot of hundreds of consumers for 10 providers, right? It would be very complex in that scenario. So we need to be conscious about the size of our use case, size of our infrastructure of our services, right? And then if you see the disadvantages, that testing APIs where the team maintaining the other side of integration will not also be using Pact. So again, the same example I was referring, like you are collaborating with a different team, but they are not happy with the Pact. They don't like Pact. They like something else. Then it's again not so good use case where you use Pact and they use something else. That's a very obvious point. Testing APIs with the consumers cannot be individually identified, right? For example, if you are running you're using a public API, then you are a consumer of that API, but you don't know who's the provider. The provider will never be there to satisfy your contract. And then the last one is testing providers with the consumer and provider team do not have good communication channels. For example, again, I will put up my example of my project. Like we are dealing with a third-party stakeholder, but they are a different company than other than Thoughtworks, and they are having different ways of working than Thoughtworks, totally different from Thoughtworks. Then in that scenarios, we cannot choose something common for testing, right? So we should have a same understanding, same communication channels where we can easily collaborate with each other. So these kind of things need to be very, very clear and conscious while choosing the Pact for contact testing. So yeah, that's all about when to use Pact and when to not use that. Yeah, that's it from my side. And the next slide, please. I think we are done. Yeah. So thank you so much for listening us, and any questions are welcome.
All right, so we will share the link to the presentation, and we will share the link to the demo as well. Probably if anybody wants to make use of it, they can use it. Yeah, so we are done with that. Thank you so much for listening to us.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so thanks Anil and thanks Lovish for another interesting session for the day. So like since organizations are interested on moving towards shift left, so this contract testing is going to play a major role on it, and we are happy to have this on today's talk. And with this, we'll move on to the last and final talk for the day. So